The moment the poor old woman walked into the luxurious restaurant, everyone started staring at her faded clothes. Some employees laughed, while others whispered that she didn't belong there. One waiter even asked her to leave before she embarrassed herself. But the woman quietly sat down, hiding the tears in her eyes. Then, a few moments later, the restaurant owner arrived. The instant he saw her, he suddenly froze, and what he did next left everyone in complete shock. The old woman slowly walked toward an empty table and quietly sat down. Her clothes were old and her shoes looked worn out. In such a luxurious restaurant, she looked completely out of place. Within seconds, several employees began whispering, "Is she lost? Can she even afford a meal here?" One waiter laughed softly. "I don't think she belongs in this place." The woman heard every word, but she remained silent. She simply lowered her eyes and gently held her small handbag. A few customers also started staring at her. Some looked annoyed, while others smiled mockingly. A young waitress felt sorry for the woman and wanted to bring her a glass of water. But before she could move, the restaurant manager stopped her. "Wait," he said quietly. "We can't allow people like this to scare away our customers." The old woman's eyes slowly filled with tears. She had experienced humiliation before, but the pain never became easier. Still, she didn't leave. Instead, she looked around the restaurant as if she was waiting for someone. Minutes passed. The whispers became louder, and then one employee finally walked toward her table. The employee stopped in front of the old woman and looked at her from head to toe. "Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right place?" he asked with a fake smile. A few nearby customers quietly laughed. The woman slowly raised her head. "Yes," she replied softly. "I am waiting for someone." The employee smirked. "Someone? In this restaurant?" More people started paying attention. Another waiter walked over and said loudly, "This is one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Maybe you should try somewhere else." Several employees laughed. One customer even took out his phone and started recording. The old woman tightly held her handbag. Her hands were shaking, but she still remained calm. "I only came to meet someone," she said gently. The manager suddenly stepped forward. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but our guests are feeling uncomfortable." The entire restaurant became quiet. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Slowly, the old woman tried to stand up. Tears had already appeared in her eyes. At that very moment, the main entrance of the restaurant opened. A luxurious black car had just stopped outside. Footsteps could be heard. Within seconds, the restaurant owner entered. All employees immediately stood up respectfully, but then something unexpected happened. The owner looked around the restaurant, and the moment his eyes fell on the old woman, he suddenly froze in place. His expression completely changed. Everyone looked confused, because for the first time in years, they saw tears forming in the owner's eyes. The entire restaurant became silent. No one understood why the owner was staring at the old woman with tears in his eyes. A few employees looked at each other in confusion. The manager quickly walked toward the owner. "Sir, don't worry. We were just asking this woman to leave." But before he could say another word, the owner suddenly raised his hand. "Enough." His voice was trembling. Everyone froze. Slowly, he began walking toward the old woman. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the restaurant. The employees became nervous. Some customers even stood up from their seats. The old woman also looked confused. Then, to everyone's complete shock, the owner stopped in front of her and respectfully bowed his head. The entire restaurant gasped. No one could believe what they were seeing. The owner pulled out a chair and gently said, "Please, sit comfortably." Tears rolled down the old woman's face. The employees looked completely terrified. Just a few minutes earlier, they had humiliated this woman, and now, the owner himself was treating her like the most important person in the restaurant. One waiter whispered, Who is she?" But nobody had an answer. The owner slowly looked around the restaurant. His eyes were filled with disappointment. And then he said something that made everyone's heart stop. "You people have no idea who this woman really is." The entire restaurant remained silent. Nobody dared to say a single word. The owner slowly looked at the old woman, and tears filled his eyes. Then he turned toward the employees. 20 years ago, I was just a poor boy. Everyone listened carefully. I had no home, no money, and no food. There were days when I slept on the streets and wondered if I would survive. The employees looked shocked. They had always known him as a successful businessman. They had never imagined that he once lived such a difficult life. The owner continued, "One cold night, I was sitting outside in the rain. I was hungry and completely hopeless." He looked at the old woman and smiled through his tears. "And then, this woman came to me." The old woman lowered her head. "She bought me food with the little money she had. She gave me warm clothes and told me something I never forgot." The restaurant became completely silent. She said, "Never lose hope. One day your life will change." Several customers began wiping tears from their eyes. The owner slowly took a deep breath. "That night, she treated me like her own son, even though she had almost nothing herself." He looked around the restaurant. "And today, everything I have, this restaurant, my success, my life, started because of her kindness." The employees turned pale. A few moments ago, they had laughed at the very woman who had changed their owner's life forever. At that moment, guilt filled the entire restaurant. The entire restaurant fell silent. Some employees slowly lowered their heads in shame. Others could not believe what they had just heard. The owner looked at the old woman with respect and gently held her hands. "If it wasn't for her, I would probably still be living on the streets." Tears appeared in the eyes of several customers. The young waitress who had felt sorry for the old woman began crying softly. Meanwhile, the manager's face turned pale. A few minutes earlier, he had tried to throw this woman out of the restaurant. The owner slowly stood up and looked around. "Tell me something," he said calmly. "If you had seen me 20 years ago, wearing old clothes and having nothing, would you have treated me the same way?" Nobody answered. Because deep down, everyone knew the truth. They probably would have humiliated him too. The owner continued. "Money can change clothes, houses, and status, but it should never change how we treat people." The entire restaurant remained silent. Several employees felt deeply ashamed. One waiter slowly walked toward the old woman. His eyes were full of regret. I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "I judged you without knowing anything about you." The old woman looked at him gently but said nothing. Then another employee stepped forward. Soon, one by one, the people who had laughed at her began apologizing. But the owner still looked disappointed, because there was something they still didn't know. And a few moments later, he revealed another shocking truth. The owner slowly wiped the tears from his eyes. Then he looked at everyone in the restaurant and said, "There is something else you should know." The entire restaurant became silent once again. He gently looked at the old woman. "For many years I searched for her everywhere. Everyone looked surprised. I wanted to thank her. I wanted to repay her kindness, but I could never find her." The old woman lowered her head. Her eyes had become red with tears. The owner continued. "A few weeks ago I finally learned where she was living." His voice suddenly became heavy. "She has been living alone for years." Several customers looked shocked. After her husband passed away, she lost almost everything. She worked day and night, helping others, but nobody was there to help her. The entire restaurant became quiet. Some employees could no longer hold back their tears. The owner slowly held the old woman's hand. "And do you know something even more painful?" Everyone listened carefully. Despite all her struggles, she never once asked me for money, help, or anything in return. The employees felt even more ashamed. This woman had changed someone's life, yet she had suffered in silence. Then suddenly the owner did something nobody expected. He slowly knelt in front of the old woman. The entire restaurant gasped. Tears filled everyone's eyes. The owner looked at her and said, "Today, everything I have belongs to you as much as it belongs to me." The old woman immediately started crying, and at that moment, not a single person in the restaurant could hold back their tears. Tears filled the entire restaurant, even the employees who had laughed at the old woman a few minutes earlier were now wiping their eyes. The owner slowly stood up and looked at everyone. "You judged her because of her clothes," he said softly. "You thought she was poor, unimportant, and unworthy of respect." Nobody dared to look at him. The manager lowered his head in shame. Several customers looked completely embarrassed. The owner took a deep breath. "But this woman is the reason I am standing here today." He pointed around the restaurant. "This beautiful place exists because one person decided to help a hungry boy 20 years ago." The entire restaurant remained silent. Then the owner turned toward the old woman and smiled. "I spent years searching for you." The old woman looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I never forgot your kindness." A few customers began crying again. Then, to everyone's surprise, The owner walked toward the center of the restaurant and picked up a microphone. "I want everyone here to remember something." The restaurant became completely quiet. "Never judge a person by their appearance." His voice echoed throughout the hall. "Because sometimes the person you ignore today may be the very reason for someone else's success." At that moment, everyone felt deep regret. But then the owner said something that shocked them even more. "From today onward, this woman will always have a special place in my life." Everyone looked at him in confusion, wondering what he meant. For several moments, the restaurant remained completely silent. Nobody knew what the owner was about to say. No one wanted to interrupt such an emotional moment. He slowly walked back toward the old woman. The owner slowly helped the old woman sit in the seat that had tears filled his eyes. "For the 20 years, I prayed that I would meet you again." Then he turned toward every employee. The old woman, "I want all of you to remember this day for the rest of your lives." Then the owner looked at everyone and said, "Everyone listen carefully. From today onward, she will never be alone again. You can lose money and earn it again." Everyone looked shocked. "You can lose a business and build another one. This restaurant will always be her home. But when you lose your humanity, the employees stared at him something that no amount of success can ever replace." And from this day, she will be treated as the most respected guest here. With tears in his eyes. The entire restaurant. He bowed his head before the old woman. Several customers began clapping softly. He said quietly. But the owner wasn't finished. "I judged you without knowing your story." He slowly turned toward the old woman. "I only looked at your clothes. Years ago, you called me your son." The old woman gently smiled. "There is no hatred in my heart," started shaking. She replied softly. "Today, if you allow me, tears will never make another person feel the pain I would like to call you my mother." Several employees started crying again. The entire restaurant gasped. One by one, they came forward. The old woman immediately covered her mouth and burst into tears. Some customers also stood up and applauded. For years, she had lived alone. The entire restaurant was filled with respect instead of laughter. Kindness from the past. At that moment, everyone realized returned to her in such a beautiful way. The poorest-looking person in the owner gently had the richest heart of them all. Before leaving the restaurant, almost everyone in the restaurant had tears and looked at everyone with a gentle smile. Even the manager and the employees who had insulted her were crying. She said softly, because they had just wanted to see whether the kind-hearted boy, a simple act of kindness, had changed 2 lives forever. The owner could no longer hold back his tears. He walked over, kissed her hand with respect, and replied, "I remembered you every single day. Everything I have today began with your kindness." The restaurant erupted into applause. Every employee stood up. This time they weren't standing because of a wealthy customer. They were standing to honor a woman whose compassion had changed a life forever. As the old woman walked toward the exit, every employee respectfully opened the door for her. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody judged her appearance. Everyone watched her leave with deep respect. From that day on, the owner introduced a new rule in his restaurant. No guest will ever be judged by their clothes, appearance, or wealth. That message was placed near the entrance where everyone could read it. Because one small act of kindness, done years ago by a poor woman, had built a future that money alone never could. And that day, everyone learned a lesson they would never forget. Never judge someone's worth by what they wear. Because the kindest hearts are often hidden behind the simplest clothes.